Welcome, bienvenidos from those yesterday and the newcomers to our second annual Latinx Leadership Conference, Stronger Together, Unidos Somos Más, sponsored by the Latinx-DC Corporate Network. This year's sponsors include Freddie Mac, KPMG, E&Y, Deloitte, Cross Country Consulting, Capital One, PwC, MITRE, Bank of America, LULAC, Romer Consulting Group, and Latin American Youth Center. So now I'm going to turn it over to learn about our mission. So the Latinx-DC Corporate's mission is to empower, equip, elevate the Latinx corporate professionals in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. We want all the leaders in the network to become exceptional leaders who drive a collective impact in the workplace and in the community. Our vision is to thrive in a society where Latinx leaders' contributions make an impact for an equitable world. So we, as your BRG leaders, we created this conference for you. So we hope that you grab a notebook, take notes, because we want you to learn and grow, connect with others, so that you too can become exceptional leaders in your organizations and in your communities. And we want to guide you, because we do believe that together we are stronger. Now I'd like to turn it over to one of our exceptional leaders within our network, Fernando Gutierrez Sol from KPMG.
We have a really fantastic panel. We're transitioning from the corporate visibility and sponsorship for career growth theme to now how can we use our Latino connections and corporate relations to really impact the social and racial equity within America, specifically the Latino population, as we look forward to getting out of this pandemic and improving our economic condition. So we have a fantastic topic today named Social and Racial Equity in America, Building Resilience in Communities and Organization. It's going to be about a 4-minute panel facilitated by Melissa and Sindy. We have two extraordinary women leading this discussion. Melissa Ortiz-Muñoz from Bank of America and Sindy Benavides from LULAC, which is spelled out. I think the Latin unit, well, she'll let you know. Both are active in the community, both in the financial services market and as leading advocates for social justice. Please join me in welcoming them to the screen. Sindy, Melissa, all you.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Melissa Ortiz-Muñoz, and I work for Bank of America, as Fernando already mentioned. I was born here in DC. My mom is from Panama. My dad's from Puerto Rico. I support the consumer and small business banking, community and client protection team. I provide leadership and insights for that team. I was also the former co-chair of the Greater Washington, DC market, ERG for Latinos, which is called OLA, the Hispanic Organization for Leadership Advancement. I wanted to thank that chapter along with the executive sponsorship for inviting me here today. I currently serve as the OLA Enterprise Northeast Regional Chair for Bank of America, and I also support our Hispanic Latino Executive Council Talent Workstream. Today, we're going to talk about social and racial equity in America. Before we dive into your career, can you tell us a little bit about your roots?
And thank you so much. And thank you as well to Linda and to Fernando for all the work that you have been doing and putting this together. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. And again, my name is Sindy Benavides with the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. And, roots is something that's so important for me. And, I start with my name, Melissa. My full name is Sindy Marisol Maria Magdalena Benavides Villeda. But because it didn't fit in our social security card, it's Sindy Marisol Benavides. So I go as Sindy Benavides. And I would tell you, I was brought to this country at the age of 1 from Honduras. And my parents really had the foresight of seeing, the violence that was already upticking in Honduras. And today, unfortunately, San Pedro Sula has the highest murder rate per capita in the world. So it's, it's both something that I thank my parents for, but also something that, as a Honduran American in the US, I'm giving back not only here in the US, but also trying to figure out how can we, help our own brothers and sisters in Honduras progress. And I come from a big family, I would say. I have 3 brothers. I am the second oldest, but everyone at home calls me the Coronela. And simply what that means is that, from a very young age and being the only girl in the family, I took charge right along with my mom, and have always been the second mother, if you could say, in my household. And, when I think of my upbringing, Melissa, and I think of the heroes around me, my parents come to mind first and foremost. I've seen their sacrifices day in and day out. And I also think of my big brother who is such a noble person, who I remember, at the age of 5, whenever I wanted something, he would, give his $5 so I could get what I wanted. And he's muy consentidor. But I think beyond that, he went on to serve in our U.S. Marines, and he has served our country, and has done a couple of tours of war. And so I look up to him as someone that is not only giving, as someone who believes in service, but as someone that I see day in and day out do public service with humility, and serve with keeping our community in mind first and foremost.
Absolutely. And it's great that you're sharing your story with all of us, because that is actually one of the topics that I wanted to bring up about you. As I've gotten to know you, your humility as you've developed and excelled at all the roles that you've had, you still have that even today at LULAC. So I wanted to talk about that journey that you had. What was your first job? How did you get to LULAC? If you could share that with us today.
Well, I would tell you, Melissa, we would be here all day, but I'm not going to do that. And it was a hard journey, right? Oftentimes when folks see in positions of power or in positions of influence, folks sometimes don't understand what it takes to get there. And, for me, Melissa, even, for example, being the first Latina to lead LULAC in 90 years, is a point not necessarily of pride, but I think of reflection, right? That in 2020, aside, in the corporate world and government and even in the nonprofit sector, Latinas are still fighting for gender equity, right? And I say that as being the first Latina, again, to serve in this role in 90 years for the organization. But I think beyond that, as I look at my career and pathway, there have been so many different points of reflection. Melissa, it hasn't been a straight line. And, oftentimes I say that, for me, doors have opened that I never imagined would open in my career. And I feel truly blessed to have these opportunities, but also recognize that it didn't happen by itself, right? It happened because there were community members who believed in me. It was because I have always been a hard worker. I'm still working on finding that balance, and I'm completely failing. And so I would say that, my career path has not been straight. I started in campaigning, and then I went into state government. And then, from state government at the tender age of 26, I came into national politics, and then decided I had to make a big decision back in 2011. And it was, do I go to campaign for President Obama, or do I come back to Virginia and campaign for Senator Kaine? And for me, Melissa, loyalty is everything. So I came back to Virginia and campaigned for Senator Kaine, and then, decided that I wanted my agenda to be 100% the community, because in my role within the governor's office, it was the governor's agenda and the Latino agenda. At the DNC, it was the party's agenda, the president's agenda, and the Latino agenda. And so I knew, after that campaign, that I wanted it to really just focus on the Latino community. And so shifted to the nonprofit world, specifically around civic engagement. And then when this opportunity came up, Melissa, I actually had to think twice about it. And why I say that, it's not that I doubted my own abilities, but at that time, I was a mother of a 1- and 3-year-old. And I knew the sacrifice that it would take away from my family and from my home life and from my children, especially, to be in this role, because I understand the moment that we're in. And so on the very last day that I could apply for the position, my husband asked me a very important question. And he asked me, would you regret not applying? And that same day we went to church, and I promise you, I think God was speaking through our pastor to get this message to me. And so immediately after I applied, I went through the different rounds and was the top candidate out of 48 to get the position. And I will tell you that that in itself, Melissa, I learned something, because walking into the final round of interviews, the committee asked me a very important question. And the committee makeup, the majority was board members. And they asked me, what would I change about the board? And at that moment, Melissa, I understood that if I didn't throw the book at them, that, potentially this was not the organization for me. And I honestly, gave them a laundry list, a compilation of things that we needed to work on as an organization in terms of governance. And I was actually surprised that even after that, they offered me the position. And so for me at this moment, Melissa, I absolutely feel I'm at the right place at the right time, doing something that I absolutely love.
Absolutely. And you can tell with your story that you were very courageous in all these moves that you took. You took calculated risks at the end of the day. And I like that you've devoted most of your career to public service, and I think that's very honorable. So I want to fast forward now as we've moved through your career to 2020, which we're in right now. A lot of things going on in our climate in America. Over 18.5% of our population is Hispanic Latino. Right now, we're dealing with the crisis with coronavirus right now, over 200,000 deaths in America. 20% of those deaths represent our Hispanic Latino population. We have a lot of workers that are Latino that can't work from home like everybody else. There are a lot of workers that have lost their job or significant wages right now. You see a lot of our community on the front line as essential workers, and you even see our DACA workers also on the front lines right now during this time. We have social unrest happening, protesting, we have a presidential election, all of these things happening in America at this time. Tell me how that's impacted you right now and what you do for LULAC.
Wow. Well, I will tell you, Melissa, that, as I think of the work that we do every day, before it felt like we were drinking out of a fire hose, and now it feels like we're trying to drink an ocean. And I say that because, at the very beginning of the global pandemic, I remember reaching out to the CDC, asking for information about COVID-19 in Spanish. And their response was, we don't have it, and we don't know when we're going to have it. And I say that because for a nonprofit organization that doesn't necessarily focus on translating, we became translators, right? Because we wanted to make sure that our community had the resources. And we created something called Ayuda en Español, or Help in Spanish. And, this resource tool is still available on our website, but it really provided a toolkit for our community in terms of understanding what are food banks, where to access domestic violence resources, how do you apply for unemployment benefits. And although, for us, we can do a quick Google search, we're able to find it literally at the tap of a button. For many in our community, they don't have access to technology or broadband, right? Or may be even, computer literate. And so, for us, it was really, thinking from a focal point of our community, literally trying to put ourselves in their shoes and making it as easy as possible. And we were really fortunate, Melissa, that we have been able to partner with various governors here in our own backyard, working with Governor Northam, and specifically at the very beginning, working to have Latinos represented on the COVID-19 task force. And so I'm very proud of how much we as an organization have pushed at the highest level to make sure that our voices are included. In California, we work with Governor Newsom and the National Hispanic Foundation for the Arts to create something called Listos California, or Ready California, through Informa Gente, and we've reached 15 million Latinos in California through our social media platforms. You know, and why that is significant is because it tells you about the importance of being able to meet our community where they are and being able to push the status quo. And I think beyond that, fighting against the norm. And believe it or not, you know, oftentimes what I see in government and even in corporations is that, you know, translating a video or translating a website seems like it's the fix, but that's not enough, right? We have to really think from the angle of the community so that the message makes sense, but more important, so that we have the outreach, the community actually hears about what the company is doing. And oftentimes that's what's missed, right? Pairing that marketing and the outreach to make sure that it actually reaches the audience that it's intended for. You know, beyond that, Melissa, we've been heavily active on the Hill doing a lot of advocacy work. We are known really for our advocacy in our programs, and doing a lot of relief efforts, everything from access to computers. So we've been shipping hundreds and hundreds of laptops across the country, including Puerto Rico. And we've also been doing a lot of food drives. In fact, this weekend we have a food drive in Dallas, Texas, and then also Los Angeles and another part of California to make sure we're reaching the most vulnerable. And I just want to put this in context because I think this is important to understand where our community is today. And doing one of the hunger relief drives here in Northern Virginia, I was connecting with one of our local leaders, and we were talking about what we were doing. And this was in Arlington, Virginia, actually borderline Fairfax County. And a young woman came up to us and basically said, right now, I have to figure out if I can purchase flour, beans, and cooking oil, or if I can purchase laundry detergent. And that speaks to one, the food insecurity issue, financial insecurity, and what I see coming is also with the moratoriums on evictions expiring on rent and mortgage, that so many in our community will also be displaced. And so, Melissa, for us, I will tell you what keeps me up at night is really trying to think ahead of how we can make sure that our community is prepared for what lies ahead.
Right, and we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, right? Each and every day that we work towards this, but a lot of people in our audience may not know what does social and racial equity mean. You've explained a little bit about that, but can you tell me a little bit more what that means to you and where that view actually stems from?
I think, you know, Melissa, when I think about social and racial equity, I think about having a balanced system in which all in our society can thrive regardless of the zip code that they live in. And, you know, why I say that is because as we look at the history of America, the truth is that there have been so many laws that have been put in place that segregated our country. And I just want us to take a step back and think about the systems that we have in place. And so, you know, one of our landmark cases, Melissa, was Mendez versus Westminster, which integrated schools in Orange County, California. That case was used in Brown versus Board to integrate all schools across America. And why I bring up that case is because we had to fight to be able to be a part of the school system. And similar to that, we have had to fight in terms of redlining, in terms of making sure that under housing and even looking at other issues like criminal justice, we are included. And so where we are right now, Melissa, is really reimagining what it looks like to have an America where race does not determine our socioeconomic status. And I think for us, it's a big dream. It's been dreamed before. But I think what is so different from this moment is that so many of us are realizing, one, that we are awake, but more than that, that we can't turn back. There is no turning back. The fact that we are now understanding that all of us play a role in changing the communities that we live in. And I just want to give a shout out to Flor de Lisa, because both Flor de Lisa and I sit on Chairman McKay's task force in Fairfax County, Virginia. And it literally takes all of us being involved in our community and bringing our voice, because nobody else can speak about our experience. Just like I can't speak to the African American experience because I am not African American, but however, I can uplift their voice. I can sit back and be a partner and sit back in an active manner, right? And so, Melissa, as I think of the future, I really do think that we have to think of how we make sure that our communities are represented at the table, understanding sometimes that we are fighting to even get in the building and even in the room. And we have some ways to go, but it will not happen if we do not elevate our voices, if we do not express our concerns, and if we do not make it known that it's an issue.
Right, absolutely. And it takes all of us to change that narrative, right? You know, and this is the beginning of that conversation. So I think a lot of our audience members are going to want to know, how do we ever achieve social and racial equity in America?
Well, it's not going to happen overnight, right? Like, we have to understand that this is not something that's going to happen today or tomorrow, that it's going to take time. And, you know, just to put it in a frame, we've been fighting this fight even before MLK was marching in the streets. You know, we were fighting this fight, you know, like, you know, back when we had so many in our community obtain freedom. We were fighting this fight since the very inception of America. And I think part of it, Melissa, and our role as Latinos is to understand our own history and understand that we can shape the narrative. And I say that because oftentimes I'm fighting, you know, someone's perception of the Latino community. And believe it or not, as Puerto Riqueña, Melissa, you know, I have to mention to folks, you know, Puerto Ricans are U.S. born citizens, right? Puerto Rico is a territory of the U.S. You know, before there was Texas, it was Texas. And before there was New Mexico, it was Nuevo Mexico. And, you know, folks forget the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty, where Mexicans were allowed to stay, retain their property, and become U.S. citizens. And that Latinos have been here for far longer than when those territories were actually part of America. And as a Virginian, and I remember serving in Governor Keene's administration, learning that before there was Jamestown, 30 years before, the Spaniards had settled. And so I think for us as Latinos, as leaders, as individuals who are influencers in leading, we have to understand our own histories. And, you know, there's a saying that my mom always says, y me dice, tienes que saber de dónde vienes para saber quién eres y a dónde vas, right? Like, you have to know where you come from to know who you are and where you're going. And I have had to relearn, because I also understand that, you know, growing up, Melissa, I did not hear about Latino heroes, right? Like, they were just not in my history book. I did not hear about St. Augustine being the oldest city in America, by the way, settled by the Spaniards. You know, we did not hear those stories, or we did not hear about the Underground Railroad going all the way to Mexico, right? And how Latinos played a role in making sure that our African brothers and sisters were able to be free. And so I say that because, you know, we are miseducated in a way, and we have to re-educate ourselves to make sure that we're uplifting our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, how we achieve this is exactly what you said. It's going to take time. It's a journey, right? You guys today, you know, work with community groups and have partnerships, right, to develop policies that advance racial equity right now in America. But you also have conversations like this one that actually talk about race and the roots of where we came from. So that's a start too. I also think you help provide those tools, you know, for Latinos in our community across America. How can we help make the change that's needed to give them that access that they need to, whether it's broadband or something else, even to food, right? And that's where this all begins. Another question in this regard is building resiliency. How do we build resiliency despite all the challenges we've now discussed, right, with our community? How do we build resiliency in our community and in our organizations today?
Well, I would say, you know, to be resilient, Melissa, we come from a very resilient community to begin with, right? And if, like I think of the journeys that my grandmother, Soyla America, has had with her 9 children, my mother, and the journey and the choices that she has made and what she has shown me through her own actions. But I think, how we build resilience is really one, first and foremost, taking care of ourselves. As a community, we give, we go the extra mile, and sometimes even more. And we have to learn to take care of ourselves, to take care of our health, in order to be able to take care of others. And I say that because I'm still on that journey learning that. I think also we have to build resilience by education and by power. And right now, how resilience looks for me, Melissa, is waking up every single day and framing my day in terms of what I want to accomplish. But I think more than that is also understanding the long term. And something that is so important for me is building economic wealth and net worth in our Latino community, and making sure that as we all rise, that we all rise together. And I love the theme of Stronger Together, Unidos Somos Más, because I, wholeheartedly believe in that theme. And I would say the other thing, Melissa, is that we have to have difficult conversations. And the only way that we build that resilience is by having those difficult conversations. And, one of the conversations we're having right now at the very highest level is with corporate CEOs and the chairs of corporate America, including the chairs of the governance committee for nominees. And why I say that is because in the last 3 weeks, we launched a campaign to make sure that companies who market to the Latino community, profit from the Latino community, have a Latino representative on their corporate board. And we're so happy to be working with the Latino Corporate Directors Association. And I will tell you, just in the last few days, we've been talking to so many different chairmen and CEOs, because we want to make sure that Latinos have the opportunity. It's not a handout. We are qualified, we have the expertise, but we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to be at the C-suite level and to also be at the corporate level. And I also want to mention that, in California, they passed SB 826, which was to increase gender equity on corporate boards. In a state where Latinos are 40% of the population, 511 seats opened up and only 17 seats went to Latinas. So, we got all riled up, and now we're working again with the governor to make sure that people of color are being considered, because it is clear to us in this example that we saw where Latinas were clearly omitted, that we have to be very intentional in the language and wording that we use in the policies that we propose, because sometimes the obvious is not obvious for others. And so as we think of resilience, Melissa, I think we have to think about it not only in the short term, but also in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about great things that are happening in corporate America, but that we could be better, right? What would you recommend to companies or organizations and how they could commit to action, regarding the disparities that you're seeing?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways, Melissa. So for one, great to see that so many of the companies that are sponsoring this event have Latino, Hispanic ERG groups. And I would say, it's so important that also the ERG groups within the companies come together, because there's so many intersections, right? Like we can be, women that are veterans, that may be LGBTQ. And so I just want to make sure that we also understand the intersections that so many of us live in, and that we have those conversations, because what we're going to find, Melissa, is that there's so many things that we share in common that maybe as all the ERGs coming together, these are maybe the top 3 things that we want to focus on for the next 2 years, right? Versus being siloed, right? Which is a way to be divided. I would say the second thing is procurement, and making sure that companies have a very clear procurement process, and also understanding the equity across part of it. I will tell you, Melissa, I am typically not the most popular person in the diversity and inclusion councils on the corporate boards that I sit on. And part of it is because I always want to know the data, and I want that data to be segregated. And I specifically want to know, what are the numbers in terms of Latino businesses that are in the procurement of that specific company, or how many Latinos are in the C-suite level, and how many are in directors level or manager positions. And so I'm very interested, obviously, in the role that I play, in the role that I serve in, that I want to know those numbers and push the companies to do a little bit more. I also want to make sure that, we are thinking of the long term in the pipeline, right? And oftentimes the excuse that I hear, Melissa, and I mean, like I hear this probably every other day, is we can't find Latinos. And I hear that and I'm like, we are 60 million strong. And by the way, in just 30 years, we're going to be 130 million. So more than double. So it's important that we today challenge the systems that perhaps is the systems that are in place that can't find us, to make sure that you're able to build that pipeline. And so I think part of it, Melissa, is, we ourselves, obviously, and making sure that there's no retaliation taking place, that we are able to use the vehicles that exist, whether it's working with LULAC and other organizations, or whether it's through our ERG groups, and, piping up what we're seeing within our own companies.
Yeah, and I think that transparency is really important. So at Bank of America, we have something called the Human Capital Report that we just released, and it provides the transparency that you're talking about, that you want to see at all these different levels, for all of the communities that we serve within our workforce. Something else that we do, and I don't know what other organizations do, but we have the Global Diversity and Inclusion Council, we have a Hispanic Latino Executive Council, and we have our OLA ERG, which represents over 16,000 of our employees. So there are deliberate conversations and deliberate commitments. Bank of America makes financial commitments, to help our community, but they also partner with other organizations that are Hispanic Latino to support our community as well. And let's talk about those partnerships. We talked at the corporate level what, they could do to commit to action. How about at the local level? What partnerships from that perspective? What are some lessons learned we could have there?
So, partnerships exist at different levels, Melissa. And, before I get to that point, I just want to give a shout out to Angie, because Angie, through Bank of America, sits on our LULAC Corporate Alliance board. And I will tell you that I absolutely love and adore Angie. Not only is she an expert in the work that she does, but she's also someone that gently nudges you and pushes you to be your better self. Mm-hmm. And I remember in my very first LCA meeting, she pulled me aside and said, Sindy, I think for next time, X, Y, and Z. And I just appreciated that, because I think, for so many of us that have that mindset of learning and being open to criticism, I took that in, I gobbled it up, and it made me better. And so I just want to give a huge shout out to Angie. But I would say I think we need to think about partnerships at different levels, right? Not only horizontal, but also vertical, and also in intersections. And so, depending on the footprint that your company has, naturally and instinctively, we start with our headquarters and the communities that we impact locally, but also thinking through, what are other communities perhaps where we have a significant workforce that we can work in local government or state government. And I'll just give you an example. I serve on the new T-Mobile D&I External Council, and they just launched this initiative called Project 10 Million, which is to combat the digital divide and the homework gap. And immediately the first thought was, I need to connect them with the superintendent of the city of Alexandria, which is where I grew up in, and then with my own superintendent in Fairfax County. And that's exactly what I did. And what I'm learning, Melissa, is that one way in which we can partner is to be connectors, right? Typically part of the challenge is just being aware of the resources that exist. And I just want you to think of all the companies that are part of this great conference and all the resources that you have for the community, right? And how many in the community are actually aware of everything that you're doing. And oftentimes, so many of the folks that are actually tuning in are leading these initiatives, right? So I would say, even if, the number of step one is awareness, right? Awareness in terms of the work that you're doing, that's a great step forward. I would say, like a second one, and this is more individual, or in some cases, companies allow you to have volunteer time, X amount of hours or days, to think about serving on a local or state board and commission. And my very first career, not only was I the Latino liaison to Governor Kane, I was also the director of board appointments. And my job, Melissa, was to look for candidates from communities of color to serve on the more than 1,200 boards and commissions that we had in Virginia at that time. And I'm so happy to say that, after serving in that role for 3 years, through the leadership of Governor Kane, who absolutely made this a priority, we were able to increase diversity on our boards and commissions by 300%. And so it speaks to the power, one, of having the right leadership in place who is intentional about diversity. But I think it also speaks about the power of finding the community members who are qualified. And we are really blessed in the DMV area that we are a hub of the highest amount of educated Latinos in the entire country. And so just imagine the role that you can play in your local community at the state level, and even at the federal level, right? If you wanted to be appointed on a board and commission, of what you can give back to your community.
No, absolutely. And I think when we think about partnerships, when I came to this market, I had to get to know what this market was about. And so some advice for people that are on the phone today is get to know who your market leader is, get to know the leadership in your market. What's their plan? What's their strategy? How are they going to build and deepen relationships in that particular market with which leaders, with which organizations? And then how does that impact you and what you're doing for example, for the Hispanic Latino community, your platform? Is it service to youth? Maybe you're working more with an organization like Junior Achievement. Is it preserving the environment? Maybe you're cleaning up the Anacostia River, with the Anacostia Watershed Society. If you're improving quality of life, could it be feeding the hungry at Miriam's Kitchen? Your local market and your organization, they have strategies around this. It's connecting those dots and all of us coming together to know how we can serve our community and make a difference through the ERGs that we have. So we're going to talk on our final question about inspiring change. But before we do that, if Pam could put up the results of the poll that we started at the beginning of this program. So how are current social issues affecting? It looks like most people did not answer that question, but significant impact looked like the leading answer there. And then on the how does your company ERG ecosystem most support community outreach? It's a mix. So let's talk a little bit more or further about how we can inspire change, how you can inspire change a little bit. So I'll start with Sindy. We have a lot of leaders watching us today, wanting to inspire change. What's your best advice to them?
I'm going to quote Dolores Huerta. And this is a quote that I keep like on 10 different sticky notes. It's in every book I probably have, on my wall, in my daughter's room, in my son's room, on my fridge. And I think this is so important because oftentimes we fail to see the potential in others. And that's something actually, to put up a little postmark on, that's something that happened to me when I was in high school. But the quote is, every moment is an organizing opportunity, every person a potential activist, and every minute a chance to change the world. And I love this quote by Dolores Huerta because to me, in the way that I interpret it, is the power that each one of us has. And I say that, Melissa, because I recently found my voice in just the last few years, understanding the power that I have through my voice. And in fact, my son a few days ago told me, "Mommy, you fight with words." And that's exactly what I do every single day. I wake up to protect and defend my comunidad, mi comunidad, through words. I think it's so important that we understand our own sphere of influence, Melissa, and who we touch, whether it's our own immediate family, our friends, or new families that we have made, our communities, and even our social media friends, right? Because I can tell you on my Facebook, I have folks that I don't know, but that I know within the social media sphere, that we can impact and influence. And then I would say, I think something that has been a huge theme in my life, Melissa, is believing in others and uplifting others. And, you can do that through kindness. You can do that by telling a young man or a young woman, I believe in you. I see something in you. Can I be your mentor, or can we stay connected? And I say that because that has been extremely powerful in my own life, in terms of how much I have been able to come so far in my journey, still being a millennial. But it didn't happen without comunidad, and it didn't happen without leaders who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself.
No, absolutely. And I echo a lot of the things, not just believing in others, but believing in yourself, just like you've talked about throughout this whole journey. Being courageous, it's hard to be courageous and share your story. So I definitely recommend that. One thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is, in your organizations, a lot of employees get asked to identify themselves for data. And that's really important based on what you talked about, to be able to understand who in the C-suite level is Hispanic, Latino. So I recommend, when those types of questions come up in your workplace, to take them seriously and to fill them out. And the reason for that is, those are opportunities that have happened for me, where they've identified me, for example, in my market for, leadership, philanthropic, Hispanic, Latino advocacy events for me to attend to. And they wouldn't have known all these things if I didn't self-identify. Another thing I want to say is connecting the dots between your business and your community. So all of you that are working in your organizations, how can you impact your community and impact at your work? Right now, as an example, at Bank of America, we have 10 million clients, and then we have 1 million small business that are Hispanic Latinos owners. And what we built, as an example, was a Hispanic Latino Business Council, bringing the dots to help our community there, right? Other thing is to inspire change. As you said, Sindy, you got to be the change too, right? Work towards that journey and that action. And then I like also a lot of things that you mentioned about, a lot of people supported you on the way. So seek those mentorships and sponsorships that inspire you, but build those connections and maintain them as well. And then finally, continuous education. I think learning is always important. Are you aware of what's happening in your community, in the market that you live in? That's question number one. But also serving, as you said, in your community, whether it's on a local board, your local school, whatever it requires, but being a part of that community as well. And then finally, I would say is reaching back, right? We're in this together. And you said that from the beginning all the way to the end of this discussion, reaching back and picking someone else up. So many have helped us along the way to get to where we are. It's our turn to do the same and help each other out. And with that, I'm going to close this panel. I thought this was a great conversation, Sindy. I really, really appreciate the time you took out to do this, to talk about social and racial equity in America, and for your leadership at LULAC and all the great things that you do for our Hispanic Latino community. And I'm now going to turn the panel back to Fernando.
Thank you, Sindy and Melissa, for the impassioned discussion. Clearly, there is so much to do that we all need to find a way to help you to do. So if you take anything away from here, is that there's a lot of stuff that we can do to move forward. Thank you for your dedicated and persistent service, you two, and for sharing in this forum. We truly appreciate your time, and it's always great. I learned a lot of stuff from that. I'm a history major. I didn't know the Spaniards were here before the British, so I need to follow up with you and on just that nugget and all the other stuff. So appreciate it very much, Sindy and Melissa.